All right, today we're going to talk about something that's, believe it or not, both thousands of years old and, at the same time, totally on the cutting edge of food tech. I'm talking about fermentation. You know, that invisible, kind of magical force that completely transforms our food. Let's break down how it all works. So let's start with a quick question. Just think about it for a second. A really sharp cheddar cheese, a crusty, tangy loaf of sourdough bread, and, a cold pint of beer. I mean, they couldn't seem more different, right? But they all share this one secret fundamental process. Any guesses what it is?
Well, the answer is fermentation. It's this incredible, ancient partnership we've had with microbes. I mean, for literally thousands of years, we've been relying on these tiny little organisms to do amazing things, preserve our food, make it taste incredible, and even pump up its nutritional value. Now, you might think we figured this out in some lab, but nope. This whole partnership didn't start with some grand scientific plan. It was really just a series of happy accidents, all driven by the simple need to survive and keep food from going bad.
And we're talking way, way back. I mean, think about it. 10,000 BCE, milk was just fermenting on its own in warmer climates. Fast forward to 6,000 BCE, and boom, we've got evidence of people making cheese. A couple thousand years later, someone probably just forgot about some crushed grapes in a jar, came back, and, well, hello, wine. It's just amazing how simple these discoveries were. I mean, just picture it. You've got goat bags filled with milk, and they're just sloshing around on a camel's back, baking in the North African sun. That combo, the heat, the movement, the natural bacteria, it was the perfect recipe for fermentation. And just like that, you get the world's very first yogurts. So for thousands of years, fermentation was basically magic. Nobody knew how it worked, it just did. But then, in the 19th century, the magic trick was finally revealed, all thanks to one brilliant chemist who finally cracked the microbial code. And that person, of course, was the one and only Louis Pasteur. Back in 1856, he was the guy who finally connected the dots. He figured out that yeast, these tiny living things, were the ones doing all the work. His definition was so simple, but it changed everything. Fermentation is life in the absence of oxygen. And just like that, a whole new field of science was born. Actually, his work created a whole new job title. Pasteur became the world's very first zymologist. That's a fancy word for someone who studies the science of fermentation. Pretty cool, huh? So here's the gist of what they figured out. It turns out different microbes have different jobs. You've got your yeasts, right? They handle alcohol fermentation. That's what gives us the booze in beer and the carbon dioxide bubbles that make sourdough rise. Then you have lactic acid bacteria, which give us that classic tangy flavor in things like yogurt and kimchi. And then there are other bacteria, like acetobacter, that produce acetic acid, which is, the main ingredient in vinegar. Okay, so for most of human history, fermentation was all about one thing: making food last longer. But then, in the early 20th century, a new idea started to bubble up. Scientists began to wonder, what if these microbes weren't just preserving food? What if they were actually good for us? And this whole idea really took off because of this one fascinating observation. Back in 1910, a Russian scientist named Elie Mechnikov was looking at people in Bulgaria and noticed they were living, on average, to the ripe old age of 87, which was just wild for the time. His theory? Their secret was all the fermented milk they were drinking. He even found the specific bacteria he thought was the key, and bam, the world's first fermented food craze was officially on. And Mechnikov's work really paved the way for a word we hear all the time now: probiotic. So what does that actually mean? Well, simply put, a probiotic isn't just any old bacteria. It's a live, friendly bacteria that, when you get enough of it, actually gives you a real, tangible health benefit. Fast forward to today, and you'll see that fermentation has kind of split into two different camps. You've got the old school traditional way, and then you've got the super efficient modern industrial way. So, on one hand, you have what are called wild or spontaneous ferments. Think of your classic homemade sauerkraut. It just uses whatever microbes are hanging around in the air and on the cabbage. The flavor is super complex and rich, but it can also be a little different every time. Then you have the other path, culture-dependent ferments. This is what big companies do. They use very specific starter cultures to make sure that every single cup of yogurt you buy tastes exactly like the last one. And if you want to understand just how diverse that wild side can be, get this, the number is 300. That's right, in one batch of traditional Korean kimchi, scientists have found up to 300 different species of microbes. That is a ton of biodiversity. And it's exactly what gives kimchi that incredibly complex, one-of-a-kind flavor. All right, so let's meet the microbial A-listers, the stars of the show. First up, you've got lactobacillus. This is the absolute powerhouse behind yogurt, kimchi, even sourdough. Then there's Saccharomyces. That's the yeast that works its magic to give us beer, wine, and bread that actually rises. And you can't forget penicillium, the mold that is basically an artist, creating those beautiful blue veins in blue cheese and the rind on a wheel of camembert. So what's really cool is that this ancient practice is now being reinvented to tackle some of our biggest modern challenges. I'm talking about food waste and sustainability. It really seems like the future is fermented. One of the most exciting ideas is something called waste valorization. I know, it sounds complicated, but the concept is actually pretty simple and kind of revolutionary. You take waste from the food industry, stuff like fruit peels or leftover bread, you add some specific microbes, and through fermentation, you can turn it into totally new, valuable products. Things like biofuels, bioplastics, even animal feed. It's literally turning garbage into gold. And if you think that's cool, the next step is even more mind-blowing. It's called precision fermentation. Basically, we can now use microorganisms, like tiny little factories. We can program them to produce specific things we want, like proteins or fats, without the original animal or plant. This technology is a total game changer, and it could make our food system way more efficient and sustainable. So we kind of end up right back where we started, with Louis Pasteur. Over 100 years ago, he predicted that the microbes will have the last word. And when you look at all the science today, from probiotics to these new food technologies, you just have to say, wow, he was so right. Our partnership with these tiny organisms is more critical now than ever before. Which really just leaves us with one last big question to chew on. If you think about it, fermentation is like this ancient library of microbial wisdom. So as we're busy engineering the future of our food, you have to wonder, what other incredible secrets are still waiting in there for us to rediscover?